What's their reasoning?
The rain on the terrace.
Big heat's on and they're afraid.
Such stimulating properties could be expected for lysergic acid diethylamide because it shows similarity in chemical structure to the analeptic already known at that time, namely nicotinic acid diethylamide, or amine. During the testing of LSD-25 in the pharmacological department of Sandoz, whose director at the time was Professor Ernst Rothman, a strong effect on the users was established. It amounted to some 70% of the activity of ergobasine. The research report also noted, in passing, that the experimental animals became restless during the narcosis. The new substance, however, aroused no special interest in our pharmacologists and physicians. Testing was therefore discontinued. For the next 5 years, nothing more was heard of the substance LSD-25. Meanwhile, my work in the ergot field advanced further in other areas. Through the purification of ergodoxine, the starting material for lysergic acid I obtained is already mentioned the impression that the alkaloidal preparation was not homogeneous, but was rather a mixture of different substances. The stoutest in the homogeneity of ergodoxine was reinforced when in its hydrogenation two distinctly different hydrogenation products were obtained, whereas the homogeneous alkaloid ergotamine under the same condition yielded only a single hydrogenation product. Hydrogenation equals sign in production of hydrogen. Extended, systematic analytical investigations of the supposed ergodoxine mixture led ultimately to the separation of the alkaloidal preparation into three homogeneous components. One of the three chemically homogeneous ergodoxine alkaloids proved to be identical with the alkaloid isolated shortly before in the production department, which H. Burkhardt had named ergopristine. The other two alkaloids were both new. The first I named ergopornine, and for the second, the last to be isolated, which had long remained hidden in the mother liquor, I chose the name ergopristine. Cryptos equals sign heaven. Later it was found that ergopristine occurs in two isomeric forms, which were differentiated as alpha and beta ergopristine. The solution of the ergodoxine problem was not merely scientifically interesting, but also had great practical significance. A valuable remedy arose from it. The pre-hydrogenated ergodoxine alkaloid that I produced in the course of these investigations, dihydroergopristine, and dihydroergopornine, displayed medicinal useful properties during testing by Professor Rothman in the pharmacological department. From these three substances, the pharmaceutical preparation hydrogen was developed, a medicament for improvement of peripheral circulation and cerebral function in the control of geriatric disorders. Hydrogen has proven to be an effective remedy in geriatrics for these indications. Today it is Sandoz's most important pharmaceutical product. Dihydroergotamine, which I likewise produced in the course of these investigations, has also found application in therapeutics, is a circulation and blood pressure stabilizing medicament under the trade name Divergit. The solution of the ergodoxine problem had led to fruitful results, described here only briefly, and had opened up further avenues of research. And yet I could not forget the relatively uninteresting LSD-25. A peculiar presentiment sign 97 THE feeling that this substance could possess properties other than those established in the first investigations sign 97 INDUCED me 5 years after the first synthesis to produce LSD-25, once again so that a sample could be given to the pharmacological department for further tests. This was quite unusual. Experimental substances, as a rule, were definitely stricken from the research program if once found to be lacking in pharmacological interest. Nevertheless, in the spring of 1943, I repeated the synthesis of LSD-25. As in the first synthesis, this involved the production of only a few centigrams of the compound. In the final step of the synthesis, during the purification and crystallization of lysergic acid diethylamide in the form of its tartaric acid salt, I was interrupted in my work by unusual sensations. The following description of this incident comes from the report that I sent at the time to Professor Stowe last Friday, April 16, 1943. I was forced to interrupt my work in the laboratory in the middle of the afternoon and proceed home, being affected by a remarkable restlessness combined with a slight dizziness. At home I lay down and sank into a not unpleasant intoxicated-like condition characterized by an extremely stimulated imagination. In a dreamlike state, with eyes closed, I found the daylight to be unpleasantly glaring. I perceived an uninterrupted stream of fantastic pictures, extraordinary shapes with intense, kaleidoscopic play of colors. After some 2 hours this condition faded away. This was altogether a remarkable experience sign 97 BOTH in its sudden onset and its extraordinary course. It seemed to have resulted from some external toxic influence. I surmised a connection with the substance I had been working with at the time, lysergic acid diethylamide tartrate. But this led to another question. How had I managed to absorb this material? Because of the known toxicity of ergot substances, I always maintained meticulously neat work habits. Possibly a bit of the LSD solution had contacted my fingertips during crystallization, and a trace of the substance was absorbed through the skin. If LSD-25 had indeed been the cause of this bizarre experience, then it must be a substance of extraordinary potency. There seemed to be only one way of getting to the bottom of this. I decided on a self-experiment. Exercising extreme caution, I began the planned series of experiments with the smallest quantity that could be expected to produce some effect, considering the activity of the ergot alkaloids known at the time, namely 0.25 milligrams mg equals sign milligram equals sign 1000 of a gram of lysergic acid diethylamide tartrate. Quoted below is the entry for this experiment in my laboratory journal of April 19, 1943. Here the notes in my laboratory journal cease. I was able to write the last words only with great effort. By now it was already clear to me that LSD had been the cause of the remarkable experience of the previous Friday, for the altered perceptions were of the same type as before, only much more intense. I had to struggle to speak intelligibly. I asked my laboratory assistant, who was informed of the self-experiment, to escort me home. We went by bicycle, no automobile being available because of wartime restrictions on their use. On the way home, my condition began to assume threatening forms. Everything in my field of vision wavered and was distorted, as if seen in a curved mirror. I also had the sensation of being unable to move from the spot. Nevertheless, my assistant later told me that we had traveled very rapidly. Finally, we arrived at home safe and sound, and I was just barely capable of asking my companion to summon our family doctor and request milk from the neighbors. In spite of my delirious, bewildered condition, I had brief periods of clear and effective thinking. Sign 97 and he chose milk is a non-specific antidote for poisoning. The dizziness and sensation of fainting became so strong at times that I could no longer hold myself erect and had to lay down on a sofa. My surroundings had now transformed themselves in more terrifying ways. Everything in the room spun around, and the familiar objects and pieces of furniture assumed grotesque, threatening forms. They were in continuous motion, animated, as if driven by an inner restlessness. The lady next door, whom I scarcely recognized, brought me milk sign 97. In the course of the evening I drank more than 2 liters. She was no longer Mrs. R, but rather a malevolent, insidious witch with a colored mask. Even worse than these demonic transformations of the outer world were the alterations that I perceived in myself, in my inner being. Every exertion of my will, every attempt to put an end to the disintegration of the outer world and the dissolution of my ego seemed to be wasted effort. A demon had invaded me, had taken possession of my body, mind, and soul. I jumped up and screamed, trying to free myself from him, but then sank down again and lay helpless on the sofa. The substance with which I had wanted to experiment had vanquished me. It was the demon that scornfully triumphed over my will. I was seized by the dreadful fear of going insane. I was taken to another world, another place, another time. My body seemed to be without sensation, lifeless, strange. Was I dying? Was this the transition? At times I believed myself to be outside my body, and then perceived clearly as an outside observer the complete tragedy of my situation. I had not even taken leave of my family. My wife, with our 3 children, had traveled that day to visit her parents in Lucerne. Would they ever understand that I had not experimented thoughtlessly, irresponsibly, but rather with the utmost caution, and that such a result was in no way foreseeable? My fear and despair intensified, not only because a young family should lose its father, but also because I dreaded leaving my chemical research work, which meant so much to me, unfinished in the midst of fruitful, promising development. Another reflection took shape, an idea full of bitter irony. If I was now forced to leave this world prematurely, it was because of this lysergic acid diethylamide that I myself had brought forth into the world. By the time the doctor arrived, the climax of my despondent condition had already passed. My laboratory assistant informed him about my self-experiment, as I myself was not yet able to formulate a coherent sentence.